The Jared Dillian Show.
I'm Jared Dillian. This is the Jared Dillian Show. Welcome. We're going to be talking about a bunch of stuff tonight. If you want to talk about your money, please call 844-305-7800. That's 844-305-7800. This is the Jared Dillian Show. You can also go to my website, which is jareddillianmoney.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at DailyDirtNap. And probably the the number one fact of the day, is that Apple, the company, Apple, is now worth more than the entire U.S. energy industry. Which seems to me, you know, when you see things like that, it's usually ding, 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 they ring the bell at the top. I don't know if it's the top of Apple. It's probably the bottom of the energy industry, but who knows? Apple is worth more than the entire U.S. energy industry. That's mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing. Anyway, we're going to be talking about some other stuff today. Let's talk a little bit about Japan. And Japan is not in the news like it used to be. I remember when I was a kid, all everybody could talk about was Japan. We had these current events things in grade school, and it was always about Japan and the trade deficit and manufacturing and electronics and, you know, their stock market and real estate. I mean, Japan had this bull market in the 80s that peaked in 1990 with the Nikkei stock index. I think it topped around 40,000 or something like that. And, you know, just outrageous tales of real estate. It was a huge bubble. And that was the top of Japan, and they haven't gotten back there yet, in spite of printing a bunch of money to buy stocks. But having said all this, you know, even though Japan's stock market never put in a new high, and even though their growth has been zero or negative, and even though they have deflation, they have the opposite of inflation, they have deflation. Even though they have all this stuff, they have a pretty good standard of living. They're still a wealthy country, and they're very productive. It's super, super interesting. But yes, they have had deflation for decades. And their greatest challenge for the Bank of Japan, their central bank, has been to try and reverse this deflation because it's really a psychological phenomenon. People think that prices will continue to go down, so they delay consumption. If you think the price of something is going to go down, you don't buy it today. You wait to buy it until the price goes down more. And that turns into a vicious cycle. And they've had no growth. And now they have negative interest rates. And they do all kinds of crazy stuff. They print money to buy stocks, to buy bonds. They've tried everything to get out of this deflation. This has been going on for years, and they haven't been able to do it. It's just continues to be a mess. And not that this has anything to do with anything, but they also don't have sex with each other. Their reproductive habits are unusual, and which is to say they don't have any. Their population is declining. It's actually declining. I'm not talking about population growth slowing down. I'm talking about their population declining. And their population could be significantly smaller 10, 20, 30 years from now. They're shrinking as a country. They're actually shrinking. Very slowly, but they're shrinking. What do you know about Europe? Well, Europe is kind of similar to Japan, actually. They don't really have deflation, but they don't have inflation either. They don't have inflation. Their stock market has been flat for 15 years. No growth in the stock market. No growth in the economy. They have negative interest rates. And they have more sex than Japan, but still not a lot. So here's how this works. We're going to get into this in some detail, but what's happening in Japan is kind of a leading indicator for what happened in Europe, which is kind of a leading indicator for what is going to happen here in the U.S. And I'll let you in on a little secret. And the secret is that most economic growth is driven by population growth. Most economic growth is driven by population growth. And if your population doesn't grow, then you have to be more productive in order to continue to grow, which isn't really happening. Productivity isn't going up. So unless you have more people working, you're not as productive. So we've had population growth globally, I mean, for centuries, but really for the last 200 years, it exploded. And, we've also had a big increase in our standard of living. And what I'm saying is that those two things are correlated. Those two things are correlated. We have become more wealthy because we have more people and more people are working. It is that simple. And if you have less people working, we will become less wealthy. And this whole process is about to go in reverse. Now, the funny thing is that you have all these environmentalists out there who say, China did this with their one-child policy, which was barbaric. And people are very concerned about population growth, that, we're gonna have overpopulation and we'll run out of resources. There's no sign that that's going to happen. In fact, population growth globally is slowing fast. And it's going to go in reverse probably about 20 or 30 years from now. Globally, the population will start declining. It's going to go in reverse. So Japan was out in front of this. But arguably they were the most advanced society, and then Europe, and then the U.S. And if you look at the numbers in the U.S., this is already happening. Some crazy stuff is happening. I spent some time going through some charts over the weekend, which is what I do on Thanksgiving break. But if you look at the numbers in the U.S., 27% of men under 30 years old, identify as virgins. And if you compare this to 15, 20 years ago, it was in single digits. Okay, and it's exploding higher. 28% of men and 18% of women under the age of 30 have not been sexually active at all in the last year. Compared to low single digits if you go back 20 years. This is a family-friendly show. We're not going to go into a great deal of detail on this, but there have been some massive cultural changes, which has mostly been driven by technology. I mean, this all started with the internet, and the internet is what I would call a diversion, and people spend their time doing other things. It also has to do with social attitudes and risk-taking, and that's one thing about my generation, Generation X, is that they are risk takers, and a lot of time bad risk takers. But this is this Generation Z, and the millennials are just nowhere near as promiscuous as previous generations. And I remember vividly one time sitting in one of my high school classes, looking around the room and thinking to myself, yeah, pretty much everyone in my class has done it. Pretty much everyone there. So when people are having kids, what are they doing? Everybody knows this. They're waiting longer. They're waiting longer to get married. People getting married at later ages. They're waiting longer to have kids, and they're having fewer kids. I know a couple here in town. The husband was 40, the wife was 35-ish. I'm not going to get it exactly right, but that was when they had their first child, and they're having their second child a couple years later, and that's not unusual for people to start having children in their mid-30s, and consequently having less children. Except on Wall Street, which is funny. I don't know if you know anything about Wall Street people, but they do have a lot of kids. I mean, 3 is kind of the minimum, 4 is average, and you do see 5 with Wall Street families. Although I think that's probably going to come to an end. It's not showing up in the numbers yet, but population growth is about to stop and go backwards, and we are going to have population decline. So we're going to talk about this in a few seconds. But from an economic perspective, there isn't more important news in economics, and I think that people fail to have an appreciation for how big this is, how meaningful it is, and how the world is going to change massively, possibly for the worse, but it's all because of a reversal in population growth. I'm Jared Dillian. This is The Jared Dillian Show.